So, hello everyone. Welcome to the first ever episode of this new series on Privacy Podcast. I'm your host, Abin Verghese. And in this series, I will talk to experts from both academia and industry who are involved in privacy-preserving technologies in various degrees. Today, I have with me Jeff Jockisch. Jeff is the CEO of PrivacyPlan and primarily works as a data privacy researcher. He's done so many podcasts on privacy-related issues, has talked to a plethora of folks, and has dedicated his precious time to creating datasets about data privacy to gain insights into the privacy landscape. He researches privacy-enhancing technologies, data brokers, privacy regulations, AI, and more. He also tracks, rates, and ranks privacy podcasts. Before his focus on data privacy, Jeff studied organizational behavior at Cornell and spent 20 plus years in tech startups, including building a text-based Q&A search engine. I'm very glad to have Jeff here with me. Hey Jeff, thanks for being here.
Hey, glad to be here. I appreciate the invitation. Ready to chat, have a good conversation.
Well, so why don't you introduce yourself in case I've missed anything, which I'm sure I have. Condensing 20 years plus of experience in a few sentences definitely means I have not done justice to your experience. So yeah, off to you, Jeff.
Well, you actually gave a pretty good summary there. I studied organizational behavior at Cornell, as you noted. I was actually graduated from the Industrial and Labor Relations School there. But I never really practiced that education much, my schooling there. But I think I put it into practice in a lot of other ways. When I first graduated, I was sort of in banking at Citibank and a couple other large regional banks, and worked on some pretty large revolutionary technology projects, including rolling out the first mortgage information system that used automatic mortgage decisions. They sort of ran a credit algorithm to find out whether you should be given a mortgage. And back then, it used to take like 30 days for you to get a mortgage decision when they would send it to underwriting and do all kinds of analyses. And generally, it took like 30 days before somebody found out whether they would get a mortgage. And we sort of made that a 15-minute decision, and actually had sort of a backup decision that we'd tell you. I think it was within 3 days if we couldn't give you a computer decision. And so I actually did a lot of work on trying to change our back-end computer systems to fit that 3-day process, which was actually a change at that point, because back then we didn't even track how information moved around, hour by hour, because it was a daily thing, right? So we moved from one department to another department, in a matter of days, not in a matter of minutes. And so that back then the system didn't even track time date; it just tracked date. So pretty crazy. But that was sort of the way I sort of started out my career. And then I sort of eventually got into sort of more marketing and marketing tech. And, it's sort of been sort of a long road. I eventually spent a long time at a search engine, a text-based search engine, and learned a whole lot about, I guess a whole lot of things there. But that was really sort of where I started to understand the importance of privacy in our machine learning and really sort of all the systems development that we need to do. With some interactions with COPA and CAN spam regulations, things like that. And after I left there, I actually spent a little bit of time working for a privacy consulting company, doing marketing for them. And this was right about at the time the GDPR released. And so it was pretty obvious that the world was changing at that point. And so that's really sort of how I got into data privacy. And I sort of decided to use my newfound interest in data privacy and combine that with a lot of the data experience that I'd I just really spent a lot of time building at the search engine, Cha that I was working at. And so now I sort of focus on the data of data privacy.
So that is actually quite an interesting journey, so to speak. And like, so like I have a really good question. Like, I'm like, nowadays privacy is a hot topic. Like, I had read somewhere in like an article that the hottest topic of 2021 was privacy. But back then, it wasn't even cool. Nobody wanted to speak, I guess. So, internet was just getting off, and if you were to talk about privacy, people would be like, "Hey, man, what's wrong with you?" Right. So, my question is, like, your conversion from an IT consultant or a marketing researcher to a privacy researcher, was it a slow, gradual transition, or kind of a road to Damascus experience, so to speak?
Well, I think it was. I guess it was maybe a little bit slow. When I was sort of studying privacy and I guess a lot of different things. When I was working for Cha, I started doing a lot of stuff on Google Plus, which was a different social network. It's actually a little bit like LinkedIn now. It was not like Twitter, but it was sort of an interest graph, and it was much more about deeper conversations. And I started studying a lot about identity and reputation systems there. And that's where I got interested in privacy. And there was actually some posts there. And I'm blanking on the name of the woman who did this, but she started posting about data brokers and how from data brokers you could actually buy lists of rape victims and people that had been in auto accidents and who were alcoholics, and alcoholics were in auto accidents, and gamblers and things like this. And I was like, holy crap! You can just buy this stuff on the internet.
Exactly.
And that was sort of a wake-up call for me and I started, doing more research into privacy, and data privacy specifically at this point. And that was sort of at the same time I was, studying COPPA, the Children Online Privacy Protection Act, because I was doing a lot of content for kids, young adults, when I was at Cha. So we had to sort of abide by those rules as well. So that sort of confluence made me start to dig into data privacy. And it was something that I really wanted to do after I left there.
Right. So yeah, so that's actually, frankly speaking, quite outrageous, so to speak, that anyone can go onto the internet and find these sensitive information. And I'm not really sure how, we have definitely improved a lot, but how far have we come along is a huge question mark, so to speak, especially in the light of scandals, so to speak, right? So to be like everybody's, especially in tech industry, is aware of Cambridge Analytica, but it's not only about that. It's about the linkage attack that was conducted in in the 2000s by two researchers, and Netflix was actually sued because of that, right? And so it was sued. They were sued millions, right? So that is something, and I believe that you are currently working as a CEO in PrivacyPlan. So could you illuminate me and my audience, what does PrivacyPlan do? And I would love to know more about the database that you've created and working on. Like, why did you start? And this database,
Yeah.
what was the inspiration, and what are you hoping to achieve?
That's an interesting story, at least to me. Maybe not so much to everybody else, but maybe it will be. So PrivacyPlan is a consultancy. I consult, for a lot of different clients on data privacy, but I don't consult on compliance issues. That's really what I guess everybody else in the privacy industry does, or most people. But that really doesn't interest me a lot. It's and I guess it's what everybody else does, and I want to be a little different. So I do. strategic consulting, speaking, training, thought leadership, things like that. But what I really love to do is create data around data privacy. And this really started when I was studying. Well, the interest was always there, but it sort of crystallized when I was studying for the CIPPUS certification from the International Association of Privacy Professionals. And because I like to put all of my thoughts into data format. And so I started creating lists of laws and lists of organizations, lists of regulators, and things like that. And I realized that it has some value. And so one of the things, actually, the first data set I created was a list of privacy podcasts because I wanted to sort of bone up and sort of hear what other people were talking about on issues as sort of a background to my study, right? And so I think it was on the IAPP website, I started posting my list of my favorite privacy podcasts. And that sort of grew into a bit of a thing, I guess. And so I decided I want to make more databases about this. And now I've got a whole bunch of different data sets. And I've actually started a big relationship with the Data Collaboration Alliance to put a lot of that data into the, not exactly the public domain, but essentially into some data projects where the privacy community can all collaborate on that data in a way that is fruitful for everybody so that we can share in that data and contribute to it.
So is it open source or is it proprietary?
Yeah, no, it's actually open source.
Wow. Well, thank you for doing that. So I actually have a follow-up question regarding this thing. Like, what can we expect from this project? So what I really mean to ask is, what would be the next 6 months to perhaps, let's say, 2 years look like with regards to PrivacyPlan?
Well, so let's talk first about the data sets. So I've actually got data sets of privacy laws. There's like 500 privacy laws, and we've got maybe 80 or 100 different data elements for each of those laws. Now, not every single cell is filled out, but we're getting pretty robust. It's pretty amazing. And we've got a lot of data points that are enumerated that, that like other people that have a set of privacy laws just don't enumerate. So that it's easy to sort of sort by things that are interesting to privacy researchers and other people that might be looking to find certain types of laws. So we think that, eventually this data set could actually run applications for people, maybe even, commercial entities. So we might be able to actually license some of that out, even though it would be sort of open source software, that we might actually be able to have it sort of like a licensing arm of that. But it's not just privacy laws, right? It's actually privacy laws, privacy regulators, privacy podcasts, privacy news, privacy enhancing technology companies. So, and the list sort of goes on, but it's all kinds of things like that. We've even developed our own privacy tagger system that uses sort of a system that I made with a couple of other folks to tag keywords, so that we've essentially built sort of like an ontology, actually more of a folksonomy for privacy keywords to all of those different things. So that you can sort of jump from one to another very easily. So that's one sort of element of what PrivacyPlan is sort of doing. I've also been getting involved in a lot of startups. So I consult with privacy startups, and I'm doing that for a couple now. And the other thing that I may do, if I actually can find the time, is I've actually started and I've sort of gotten delayed on actually writing a book on the history of privacy. And there are a few books on the history of privacy that are out there, and they're quite good. But I don't want to do what other people have already done. I don't want to write a prose history of privacy. I want to write a data-driven history of privacy. So I want to take all the data points that we can gather about data privacy in the ways that I sort of like to do, and then use that to actually drive the narrative and to create charts and timelines and different things, and break that out into multiple different lenses and facets. So it might be, one chapter of the book is the history of privacy in the telephone, right? And it would have all the different things that you might ever want to think about with the phone. And another one might be privacy in the body, and it would look at all the different, court rulings and things about, historical events that were of significance that relate to that, and all the kinds of data points. And I think it could be really, really interesting to look at it that way, as opposed to just hearing a narrative about the issues. When you look at, all the different types of lenses that we could do, I think it could be really compelling.
Yeah, I certainly do agree with that, because as a data scientist, I would love to have a perspective like what the data wants to tell me rather than what the author wants to tell me, right? Because when data left on its own is more, so to speak, kind of decentralized, not exactly decentralized, is more, first of all, extracting insight from the data is very difficult. So I'm guessing that would be one of the main challenges that you will face. But certainly it is very interesting, and certainly a very new lens through which we all can learn. Because I myself actually am planning to do research on privacy enhancing technologies, and actually my next question is actually building on top of this only. So right, so what I have seen, at least in the industry, at least to the exposure that I have, limited as they might be, there is a kind of a chasm between industry and academia, right? So when I say academia, I want to consider the engineering aspect as well, right? So, of course, you could correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm seeing, at least in the industry, is that there are lots of regulations, right? So to speak, regulations coming up, and while they have achieved a lot of stuff, what they have done essentially is that they have said, you shall not do this, and you shall do certainly this. But how to do that is a huge question mark that they haven't really answered, at least in my opinion. Right? So I believe that how is the engineering part, and the academia is the precursor to engineering. And what I'm seeing is that the companies are struggling, they're struggling to do that. So here comes the privacy by design. So when you are building a new system, instead of circumventing around GDPR or CCPA, how to avoid fines, how to not violate, instead of doing that, let's talk about what if the companies could actually, build their products or services around privacy, like privacy by design, right? So I believe there's a huge chasm. So what do you think? What do you think that companies can do right now to do this, to actually address the question instead of circumventing the laws, so to speak?
Well, I think step back for a second. We've come a long way over the past few years with privacy regulations. They've come into force, and they're starting to get some enforcement mechanisms now. Some behaviors changing, but I don't think you and I are actually any safer in terms of having our data uncollected or undistributed or unsold. In fact, I think more of our data is being collected, and more of it's being copied, and more of it's being sold, because there's more of it, and there's more players out there. The FTC said back in 2014 there were like 4,000 data brokers. I think there's a lot more than that now. I mean, it's like 8 years later, right? So I've even got a database of data brokers that I've tried to put together because nobody else has one. I've petitioned the FTC and a couple other government organizations, and nobody claims to have a database of data brokers. Obviously, that's an industry that needs some regulation, and apparently nobody even knows who they are. So, but to come back to your question, I think you can see the scale of the problem, right? We have new regulations, but we aren't any safer. So obviously it's not working. So how do we incent these companies to do something? Consumer sentiment is changing, despite what you might hear from some quarters. I think some ad tech people are still sort of naively saying that consumers don't care about privacy, but they do, even if their actions don't always show it. So I do think that the companies that have a privacy forward, privacy by design, privacy by default mentality can win in the marketplace. The problem is, for a lot of these companies, that if they're up against incumbents in a market that have a network advantage, they've got a big hill to climb, right? So it's not like a happy book can compete against a Facebook very easily.
Yeah.
Because because they've got more privacy. We've seen that's a big problem. So competition needs to be enhanced in order for these privacy preserving alternatives to have a real chance. It's not privacy alone is not going to do that in most use cases or most markets.
I really like your optimistic view that certainly the consumer sentiment is changing. To me at least what I can see in my surroundings, that privacy, people are concerned about privacy, but they talk about it, but they view privacy as given rights, right? So there was this professor that I had talked with from the University of Ottawa. So he certainly agrees, and he raised a very good point that people think that privacy should be free and it should be by default, so to speak. But the problem with that, if you get something for free, you take it for granted, so to speak, right? So that is why they talk about it. They want privacy, but they view privacy essentially as a nice-to-have feature, right? So till now, if a product is offering something better, like some other better feature or services, and privacy is not at the core, customers are willing to overlook that and use that. But I really like your optimistic views, where you said that sentiment is essentially changing, and I truly believe that when new players will rise in the market to provide the same service or even better services with privacy at the core, I guess companies who are not doing that will be incentivized to do that, right? So I really believe that, and thanks for that. Building on top of this question, and regarding with regards to your past experience in marketing, I have a question. So it's more like this question is actually pretty close to my heart, so to speak. So reimagining advertising and market incentives, so to speak. What if we could develop healthier incentives for today's digital platforms? Like right now, the attention economy is currently fueling key metrics on social media apps, right? So, but that's the case even on ad platforms that optimize for engagement, because that's what we can measure and analyze to indicate KPIs are being met. But what if users' well-being became a better and more ethical way to measure success? What if instead of competing with sleep, so to speak, Netflix's content recommendations could draw on health and lifestyle data and be optimized to improve your well-being without exposing your sensitive data? For example, content recommendations help us unwind, sleep better, or improve our quality of life or mental health, rather than crudely optimized to keep us awake or stay longer on the app. I have two-part question. Is it a naive and a kind of an unrealistic thing to expect? If no, what do you reckon should the business model be to achieve this thing? And what incentives could companies have to achieve this?
So you had a lot in there. I like the idea of companies trying to measure users' well-being and optimize for that. It's a pretty amazing idea, actually, Alvin. People should be working on that.
Yeah.
The hard part there is connecting actions to outcomes in people's minds, right? Do the things I watch on Netflix and the things I post or interact with on Facebook, do those particular things make my life better or worse? Do they change my anger level, my stress level, my sleep soundness, my happiness quotient? I think it's obvious that they do, but how do you make that specific connection between a specific thing, right? And how do you convince people that they're more than just tangentially related? And so if I do take specific pieces of content off of Facebook or off of Netflix and exchange them for other pieces of content, how do I know that that influenced me or changed my behavior or changed my outlook, right? I think it's a really interesting idea, though. And also, it's not maybe not just content; it could also be UX designs too, right? So, not impossible, but sort of hard. But let's say that you could do it, right? If we are we going to leave the free market to do that, right? So we just talked about, does Happy Book have to compete with Facebook, right? I don't think that works in that sort of free market model where that competition has to happen. But what if we were to do something like we could actually measure the mind pollution in America? Like mind pollution was like environmental pollution. We could think of that as like an externality. And maybe that externality is an externality of our attention economy.
Mm-hmm.
If we did that, could we then give platforms and advertisers and content creators, attention certificates, allowances that they can pollute only this much into the mindset, right? Like cap and trade, the way that works now for pollution. Pollution credits, I think, I'm not sure exactly what they call those, something like that, right? So this much pollution, and after that, then we start fining you, and maybe fines are tripled during the election season, something like that. I think it's sort of an interesting idea that's not out of the realm of possibilities. Certainly, I think that a lot of people would say that we have to figure out some way to change how that's working. I think we had talked before. You were going to talk a little bit about a question about the attention economy. Did you already go through that, or is that something you were going to ask?
The way the reason I asked this question was because right now Netflix is not only Netflix, any entertainment industries, companies, they actually want to gain a lot of revenue, right? And the only way to do that would be to have a lot of daily user actives, and a time that those daily user actives spend their time, which is actually kind of counterproductive to end users, so to speak. Like, it really deteriorates their sleep cycle, it messes up their circadian rhythm, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like, the reason I asked this question was, if we were to use privacy, and if you were to use, let's say, these information flows, so to speak, which, by the way, is my next question, don't you think that it will actually backfire? Like, the companies are incentivized not to do it because it will actually decrease the revenue. And do you do you think that we could find a way to get the best of both worlds? Right, we could solve the problem of having a better, let's say, life balance, and keeping the revenues high as well, because both are important, so to speak, if you'd ask me.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the attention economy and thinking about this. So is there a way out of the attention economy? And I'm not sure that there is. We have profit-seeking companies, right? They're driven, unfortunately, by quarterly profit increases. And there's not enough competition. So even those that start off with a paid model start slipping into advertising to pump up their revenues. If you look at Netflix, right, they're now considering an ad-supported tier. If you go way back, and probably most people don't remember this, but cable TV, when it first came out, was you paid for cable TV, but all the channels were advertising free, except for the broadcast channels, which were added in later, right? And they had advertising on them because they were, broadcast TV, and they already had ads on them. They were just added in. But now, of course, you pay for your, $100 for your cable subscription or whatever it is, and everything has ads on it on top of that. Right? And even the stuff that you pay for now, like HBO and Amazon Prime and Apple TV, even if they don't have advertising clients, they're still doing content promotion of their own stuff to you. So probably only a matter of time before they start adding advertising or advertising tiers as well to that. Because the revenue need never goes away, right? It's just every quarter they need to have an uptick. So yep. I don't see that really going away. It's clear that the content we're being fed is bad for us, right? But, emotion is going to drive eyeballs, and I don't see how that is going to go away. And now that we have no journalism per se, no editorial review, virtually no line that we won't cross, to seek a click, now we have, lies and misinformation and sensationalism, whatever it takes to get a click.
Yeah, true. It is. It is very upsetting. I mean, call me old school, but actually, just to give you a personal anecdote, but call me old school, I play guitar, as you can see. So I prefer music which requires the soul of the artist. So I'm talking about classical music, I'm talking about Queen, I'm talking about Metallica, I'm talking about these folks who put the soul into creating music, and some of them had died, so to speak. And nowadays, music is complete. I don't want to use certain words, but it is pathetic, man, so to speak. And so is the news, so to speak. Now, I'm not very old, but perhaps you're old enough to attest to the fact. Was this the same situation back then? Like the kind of polarization that we have in news outlets, and like especially in the US that we have. Right, and not only the US. Why am I demonizing US? Like every single country has that. Right here, back at home, I can see the polarization as well. So, did this happen back then? Also, like we're talking about 80s, 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I think you can sort of see the same thing that goes through every generation. People see music and news and social media. I mean, social media is a relatively new thing, but I think we see things in a different light. But there is sort of a fundamental shift, I think, that's happened with the internet. It's sort of changed everything. It's made us lower a lot of standards. I don't know that we've seen anything quite like it. And there are some things that we need to fix, or we're going to be in trouble, right? Because the information flows do suck, and I've got a bit of a prescription for that. If you want to get to that question,
yep, yeah. So talking about today, information flows. So we all know that today's information flows are kind of broken, and there's no question that fixing information flows could benefit all of us, talking about consumers and business both. So this will undoubtedly require a multidisciplinary effort across sectors and continents to resolve. And there's already huge consumer demand for better digital solutions and more trustworthy brands. So first, we need to increase awareness, lower the barrier to entry, and awareness of these problems, and establish a shared vision of what a privacy-preserving world might look like. The question is, how do you think we can achieve this, and what steps can be taken from a company's perspective?
Well, I've got a pretty good prescription. Unfortunately, it's not particularly easy to accomplish from a company perspective. It's really more from a societal perspective, or maybe from a tech giant perspective. So let me go there first, and maybe then I can bring it back to maybe a more company perspective. So it's really sort of a 3-layered approach to sort of solve our information flow problem, and that is identity systems, reality systems, and reputation systems. So if we start at number 1, identity systems, I think everyone probably agrees that Web 2.0, or what we're in right now, is sort of a broken client-server model where, we're hitting a website, but we really don't have any agency when we do that. We're sort of a non-player character in a video game. We don't even really have any identity when we get there. We don't have any state. That's why they've had to create cookies and stuff to track us and maintain state, because it's Web 2.0 is a client-server model that doesn't really have any identity model for us. So we need to fix that. We need to control our identity. We need to be able to parse pieces of our identity out as required. Some people call that self-sovereign identity, whether you want to use that name or something else. We need to be able to do that so that we can do things like authenticate our age, and that we're over 18 or over 21, for instance, or that we're eligible to vote, but without actually having to say who we are. We could still be anonymous, for instance, but be able to walk into a bar or a voting booth. But in other cases, we might want to be a persistent pseudonym. On Twitter, I've got a pseudonym called PrivacyStan. So I might want to be PrivacyStan. That's privacy underscore Stan, if you happen to look that up. I think there's an account you might not want to go to if you just do it as PrivacyStan. But regardless, persistent pseudonyms are ways for us to sort of be different people. If we want to, have, different aspects of our lives presented, we don't have to be the same person all the time. Sometimes for different groups of people, we want to be a little bit different, right? But we also might want to be ourselves. I might want to be Jeff Jockisch in certain situations so I can present my full identity. So this is important because if we can get this right, if we can control our identity and parse it out in certain ways, like I just discussed, a lot of our privacy problems that we're experiencing right now go away, right? We can actually fix a lot of these things, because imagine if you're in this model, in this new model, whether you want to call that the metaverse or Web 3.0 or whatever, if I can control my identity when I come visit your website, Abin, then I can be Jeff Jockisch, or I can be PrivacyStan, or I can be Mr. Anonymous. And I can choose whether I want to have you give me ads that are behaviorally targeted to Jeff Jockisch, or maybe are targeted maybe a little bit less so, maybe contextually to PrivacyStan, or not targeted at all to Mr. Anonymous.
Right, that is something, but, and I guess it is kind of a paradox, and this is very new perspective, so to speak. Actually, it reminds me of Oscar Wilde's saying that give man a mask and he'll reveal the true identity, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. So what you're essentially saying is the same thing, right? So give us the mask to cover ourselves, let us control our own identity, and we'll be more transparent. Am I correct to restate that, rephrase it?
Yeah. I think, we keep telling the companies to do this for us, right? But if we give users agency, and look, now everybody doesn't want to necessarily make a billion decisions in their life. And a lot of people will say that maybe that's too much agency. But if we built the systems in a way that the UX is easy, so I log into a website and I can pick what my identity is when I'm logging in, that's not so hard. I mean, we're already doing that. We have to log in anyway, right? So I think it's not all that big of a stretch to say that identity could actually solve a lot of our privacy problems. So let me quickly talk about reality and reputation. I won't go into so much detail. Reality systems, I think, are just something like a knowledge graph where we ought to be able to mostly agree that the sky is blue and that water's wet and a few things like that. I know that, this world is broken in a lot of ways and we don't all agree what is the ground truth on a lot of things based upon political conviction and other things. But certainly, there's got to be 90% of the information in the world that we can agree on. And if we could actually apply that reality filter to what people post online, we could potentially use that then in something like a reputation system where we could start to grade people on whether or not they're actually bots or whether or not they're actually truthful in what they post. We have to be careful not to create some kind of a social scoring system like China does.
Exactly.
Be very careful, right? But there are ways I think that you could actually create reputation systems that would work. Now, if you step back, right, remember that you still have an identity system, right? So when I post, I can be Jeff Jockisch, right? Or I can be Privacy Stan, or I can be anonymous. So I can still decide who I want to be when I make that post, right? But if I want to post stuff as Jeff Jockisch, and I want to post falsehoods, right, or things that are controversial, I need to realize that that's going to stay with me. That's going to be part of my reputation going forward, right? And if I'm, making falsehoods that are, not going to be recognized by the reality systems, then I'm probably going to have to pay for that with my reputation.
Makes sense. But to me, it sounds very awfully similar to China's social credit score. So what is the difference between a reputation system, so to speak, and a social credit score system?
Well, I think the difference is in who's in control of it to some extent, right? And also in what it's actually saying and doing for you. I'm not talking about creating a score that says that, Aben is a 50 and Jeff's an 85. I'm talking about maybe changing the color code of the post that somebody makes based upon the topic that they're posting on and the reputation that they've got based upon what they've posted in the past. So if Privacy Stan posts on privacy all the time and he generally posts things that people like and that meet with the reality systems, then maybe he gets a higher score. But if he starts posting about cooking and he says that water's dry, then he's going to get bad scores. See what I'm saying? But and that maybe that means that there's a red flag on his post, something like that, right? But it doesn't mean that he no longer gets to go to ride the train, right? Or he can't get a loan. So, yeah. But I think you're right to question that, right? Because I don't know if we have to be very careful that one doesn't merge into another if we even start to go down that path.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it does make sense. Like you're talking about, like in Stack Overflow, we have reputation scores, or in Reddit, we have like number of upvotes, so to speak. So if your answer is relevant and true to your identity, very cohesive to your identity, you'll get a higher score. And it definitely is not like China's, and China's credit scoring system. And what you truly said is that the perspective is not about who controls it. It's about, perspective is about who controls it. So in China, Communist Party controls everything, right? So
Right.
perhaps that's definitely not, perhaps that's the best model to approach, I guess. Right? I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And this next question, Jeff, is like, I have tried, like, I desperately need an answer to this, Jeff, and I really can't, I'm counting on you. Do you think that it is possible to penetrate into industry, like, let's say the healthcare, which is in dire need of data sharing for better services to patients, which, by the way, could be achieved through solutions like federated learning, but are highly, highly regulated by the government? Like, how to penetrate into that?
So, yeah, well, the whole idea behind HIPAA was actually to increase data sharing. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, the initial focus wasn't even on privacy, even though that's what everybody thinks is a privacy law. And it is now to a great extent. But the original idea was data sharing. It was to help people be able to move their information when they changed employers. And so it actually has helped some data flows, but there's also a big problem because it doesn't really keep the insurance companies from grabbing all of your prescription information, and it doesn't really keep your health information secure outside of covered entities. So it's not really doing the job that it needs to be doing. And you're right that it still restricts a lot of the data sharing that we could be doing to really improve our healthcare systems. Even though there's some pretty big federal prohibitions about people in the healthcare industry keeping their data from moving in and out of healthcare systems. It's sort of complicated, but there's some specific laws that say you can't sort of keep your healthcare system in an enclave, your healthcare information systems in an enclave. But there's also similar laws that say that you also can't share them without doing X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, right? So it's complicated. So how, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so how do we get around that? Well, I think you're right. I think we need a new healthcare law, a Healthcare Information Act. And I don't see that coming in anytime soon in America. We can't even get a privacy law, let alone redo something major like HIPAA. But it would be really valuable. And I
truly agree.
You're right that privacy enhancing technologies like federated learning would help a lot. Now, there was a law. What was the law that they passed a few years back that helped with that? I'm blanking on what it was called. The IDEA Act or something like that. I think I've got that wrong. It was supposed to actually help with that. It was supposed to help with clinical research and some other things. Now I'm blanking at it. But that was supposed to help with some data sharing, at least for research purposes. I don't know whether that's actually helped in the research area or not, but there may be some ways that they could create some smaller bills that would improve the effectiveness of federated learning and privacy enhancing tech in the healthcare space without having to overhaul the whole law.
Makes sense. So, the main problem, the reason I asked this question was because in academia, academia is actually ahead of the real world in this thing. We already have solution, but the laws haven't caught up yet. Right? It's because the data is set in different silos; they can't really interact with each other. Right? So, I wish. It's not a U.S. problem. In the U.S. you have to consult with the insurance companies, but in countries like the UK, Switzerland, and let's say Canada, Australia, they have a universal government single payer system, right? At least in Canada and the UK, the UK has NHS. So maybe they don't really consult with the insurance company. So I guess in that system you could have different silos of data interacting and sharing data privately, so to speak. But again, what you said is that we require the laws to catch up. True. So my last question, Jeff, to you is, it's not exactly a question. It's actually your word to the wise for an up-and-coming new startup, or maybe someone like me who wants to build solution in an academic setting, so to speak, who wants to build a solution with a privacy by design paradigm.
So I think what I would say is, don't just focus on privacy by design, but think of it more as privacy by default. You don't want users to have to make privacy decisions that they don't have to make. It should be privacy by default whenever possible. There's some social science research out, I think it's maybe a year or two old, where they say that the average American makes 35,000 decisions a day. And that's a pretty good indication of decision fatigue, which is part of the reason why, cookie banners just get clicked and clicked away and nobody even thinks about them. I think I did that when I logged into this broadcast. There was a cookie banner that popped up and I said, okay, I didn't even read it. There was a couple options and I didn't even care. I just clicked it because I don't have time. And your users won't either in most cases. So if you don't have privacy as the default option, most consumers are not going to take it. They're not even going to evaluate it because they're not, they're not making an informed decision. They're not, I'm blanking on what the name of the bucket is that I'm trying to think of, but they're not making a decision based upon informed consent. They're just making a decision to make it go away.
That's true. Like decision fatigue. That's new to me and does make sense. Yeah. So thank you so much, Jeff, for coming over here and actually interacting with me. It has been hugely helpful to me. And I guess I'll share the link to your to PrivacyPlan in the description of this YouTube video, that I'll post. And folks, this was Jeff, and thank you for coming over here. And cheers.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it, Abin. Been wonderful chatting with you.
Likewise. Cheers. Bye bye.